Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are marching straight into the power center of the Roman Empire to investigate a military unit that, well, it perfectly embodied the inherent violence and instability of imperial rule. They were created to be the ultimate shield for the emperor, but for 3 centuries they proved to be the single most dangerous internal threat to the state. The Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, and we aren't just looking at bodyguards here. Not by a long shot. We are looking at the ultimate insiders, guys who mastered the art of political assassination and, frankly, financial extortion.
300 years. That's a long time.
For 300 years, the Praetorians held the power of life and death over their rulers, repeatedly proving that the greatest threat to Roman power, never really came from the outside frontiers. It came from the men standing guard right inside the imperial bedroom.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible paradox. Our mission today is to trace their volatile arc. We'll follow their origins from humble Republican field escorts right up to the centralized elite Imperial Guard.
And we need to detail the massive privileges, the pay, the internal organization that really set them apart.
Absolutely, and explore their deadly, defining role as kingmakers, the ones who destabilize the empire again and again. And finally, look at the decisive act that permanently dissolved them.
And that paradox, it starts right at the founding, really. Their core roles were essential, you can't deny that. Personal bodyguard duty, of course, that's the obvious one.
But it was more than just standing around looking tough.
Oh, much more. High-level functions like counterintelligence, rapid crowd control within Rome, which was crucial, and gathering military intelligence, not just in the city, but from governors traveling back and forth. They were truly the emperor's instruments, designed for discretion and supposedly absolute loyalty.
But the truly unique detail, the thing that immediately flags them as a potential threat, was this. They were the only armed troops permitted to bear weapons inside the pomerium.
The pomerium, yeah, that ancient sacred boundary of Rome itself. It was both a legal and a religious line you just didn't cross armed.
A huge deal in Roman tradition.
Massive. And this privilege, which Augustus granted very carefully, very deliberately, it instantly gave them a monopoly on armed force right in the city center. No other soldiers, no regular legions could cross that line carrying weapons. It basically institutionalized their power from day one.
So you have this privileged, heavily armed, very visible force walking around the heart of Rome. What was the immediate public reaction? They weren't exactly cheered in the streets, were they?
Far from it, no. They were widely dreaded, particularly by ordinary civilians and definitely by the senatorial elite, who saw their own power just slipping away. Our sources make it pretty clear.
Like Juvenal.
Exactly, the poet Juvenal. He wrote about the daily grind, the indignities of life in Rome, and he famously recounted, rushing through the city streets and getting a nail left in his foot from the heavy, hobnailed sandal, the caliga of a rushing Praetorian.
Ouch. It's such a small detail, but it speaks volumes.
It really does. It perfectly symbolizes that overwhelming physical presence of a military state, kind of barely contained within a civilian capital, that constant underlying tension.
It paints a perfect picture of that fear. Okay, let's roll back the clock now. Part 1. How did this highly exclusive, powerful institution actually come into being? It didn't just spring up fully formed under Augustus, right?
That's absolutely correct. The whole idea of the cohors praetoria, the Praetorian cohort, it's derived straight from Republican military practices. It goes way back.
And the name itself, Praetoria,
comes from the Praetorium, which was simply the name given to the commander's tent in a standard Roman military camp. The HQ, basically.
So, back in the late Republic, if you were a top general, someone holding Imperium that right to command you, obviously needed personal security out in the field.
Definitely. So you'd select a temporary unit, picked men from your existing troops, your cohorts, Praetoria, to serve as a field escort, protect you from surprise attacks, or even, internal dissent among your own soldiers. It was purely functional, necessary, and importantly, temporary.
It wasn't a permanent fixture yet?
Not at all. It's an ancient tradition, really. The earliest historical mentions we have date back to maybe 275 BC, providing bodyguards for the Scipio family, the famous generals.
The Scipios.
Yeah. But the example that really seems to have crystallized this practice was General Scipio Aemilianus during the Siege of Numantia in Spain. This is around 134-133 BC. He specifically selected 500 soldiers to be his permanent field guard. It shows commanders were becoming very aware of the personal risks they faced on campaign.
Okay, so this practice becomes pretty standard, especially during the chaotic civil wars. Mark Antony had his Praetorians, Octavian the Future, Augustus had his.
And everyone who is anyone had them.
But then Octavian wins. He defeats Antony at Actium in 31 BC. And then suddenly he faces this massive political problem. How do you go from being a wartime general with this loyal armed personal guard to being the peaceful princeps, the first citizen of a supposedly restored republic?
Well, he was the master politician, wasn't he? Octavian kept the Praetorians. He couldn't afford not to. He merged selected loyal forces from Antony's defeated guard with his own and formally integrated them into the state structure. But, and this is key, he had to tread incredibly lightly.
Why so cautious?
Because Rome was exhausted. They just endured decades of brutal civil war, fought largely over military dictatorships. The last thing the population or the Senate wanted to see was Octavian setting himself up with a massive private army in the city.
Right. So this is where his political genius comes in. He establishes the formal guard 9 cohorts, initially about 500 men each.
Yeah, roughly 500 at first, though that number gets standardized later, probably bumped up to 1,000 men per cohort under Tiberius, or maybe even late Augustus. So you're looking at a total force of somewhere between 4,500 and maybe 6,000 elite soldiers eventually, a significant force.
But he couldn't just station all 6,000 of them in downtown Rome.
No way. That would have looked like a military occupation. Instant panic. So, to maintain what our sources sometimes call the Republican veneer, that illusion of normalcy, Augustus initially allowed only 3 cohorts to be actively on duty in Rome at any one time.
And where do they stay? Not in a big fortress yet.
No, not yet. That comes later with Sejanus. Under Augustus, they were housed discreetly in private billets scattered around the city. The remaining 6 cohorts were garrisoned in surrounding Italian towns like Ostia or Puteoli.
So close enough to be called in quickly if there was, say, a riot or a fire or an emergency.
Exactly. They could be deployed rapidly, but they were spread out enough to prevent that visual shock, that feeling of a massive standing army camped right in the capital. It was a very careful political balancing act. Reassure the Senate, reassure the people. Rome isn't under military rule. Wink, wink, wink.
A delicate dance. And this whole structure gets formalized when?
The final piece clicks into place around 2 BC. That's when Augustus formalized the command structure by appointing the first 2 Praetorian prefects, Quintus Astorius Scapula and Publius Salvius Aper.
2 prefects initially.
Yes, likely to prevent any one man from holding too much power, another classic Augustan check and balance. But this was the moment the Guard became a truly unified, state-sanctioned entity. And it established the prefect position, a role that, as we'll see, eventually eclipses almost every other office in the empire in terms of actual raw power.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2, because if you managed to get into this elite corps, you weren't just any soldier. You were joining a privileged class. We really need to talk about the pay, the perks, the status. It completely changed what it meant to be a soldier in Rome.
Oh, the difference in compensation was staggering, just huge. They received what the Romans called sesquiplex stipendum.
Sesquiplex stipendum, meaning?
Pay and a half. Simple as that. Compared to the regular legionaries, the poor guys slogging it out on the distant frontiers in Britannia or Syria.
Okay, put that into actual money for us. If a standard legionary, the absolute backbone of the Roman army, was earning, say, 250 denarii per year in the early empire,
then a Praetorian, stationed comfortably near Rome, immediately started at 375 denarii per annum. That's a 50% premium right off the bat just for being in the Guard.
Wow, just for staying close to home, essentially.
Pretty much. And this pay only went up over time. Later emperors, especially during periods of civil strife when they desperately needed the Guard's loyalty, just kept increasing that annual stipendum.
Like who?
Well, Domitian gave them a big raise. And then later, Septimius Severus, after he completely reformed the Guard, really opened the coffers. Under Severus, the annual salary soared to something like 1,500 denarii.
1,500. That's 6 times the original legionary pay.
Exactly. Paid out in 3 massive installments, January, May, September. You could argue they were the highest paid fighting men in the entire ancient world at that point, certainly in the Roman world.
And it wasn't just the salary, was it? Ask any soldier. Pay matters, but so does how long you have to serve and what happens when you retire.
And again, the benefits were vastly superior. Their mandatory service time was significantly shorter. Initially, under Augustus, it was probably 12 years for Praetorian compared to 16 for a legionary.
4 years less. That's significant.
Huge. Even when these service periods were later extended, the gap remained pretty consistent. It became 16 years for the Guard versus 20 for the legions. So still 4 fewer years of active duty, potentially life-threatening duty on the frontier, all while earning significantly more money. It's a massive incentive to try and get in.
But the real X factor, the financial mechanism that defined them, and you could argue ultimately corrupted them, was the donativum, the imperial gift.
Yes, the donativum. This wasn't salary, this was a bonus, a massive lump sum payment that became absolutely essential for securing loyalty. It was basically institutionalized bribery.
How did it work? When did they get these payouts?
It became a foundational political contract, really. Every single new emperor was expected, and they learned very quickly they were required to distribute a huge donativum immediately upon their accession, just to secure the Guard's support.
So day one on the job, the first thing you do is pay off the Praetorians.
Pretty much. And this payout was often enormous, equivalent to multiple years of their already high salary. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It became a recurring event. They get smaller, but still significant, donativa at major imperial family events, birthdays, marriages, adoptions, or, crucially, following failed plots or conspiracies, a way to reaffirm loyalty, or rather, buy it again.
Like after the plot involving Messalina against Claudius.
Okay.
Or Piso against Nero.
Exactly. Loyalty needed to be rewarded, and potential disloyalty needed to be bought off. The moment this whole system, this institutionalized corruption, became blindingly obvious to everyone was during the accession of Claudius in AD 41.
Right after Caligula's assassination.
The sources tell us the Praetorians found Claudius hiding behind a curtain, dragged him off to the Castra Praetoria, proclaimed him emperor, and were immediately compensated with a bonus worth, wait for it, 5 years of their salary.
5 years' pay. Instantly.
Instantly. Just for finding him and backing him. What's really fascinating here, and deeply troubling for the stability of the state, is how the source of the emperor's power fundamentally shifted.
How so?
It moved away from any sense of constitutional legitimacy, the Senate conferring power, the people's approval, tradition, and it became purely a transactional contract with this one military unit. The Guard realized they were the true kingmakers, and their loyalty was completely negotiable, with the price always going up.
It created this deadly feedback loop, didn't it? The Guard knew that instability, maybe even helping along an assassination, was the quickest route to the next massive bonus.
Precisely. A change of emperor meant payday. It's a terrible incentive structure.
But while the pay was astronomical and the bonuses flowed, getting into the Guard in the first place, especially early on, was incredibly difficult.
Oh, yes. Initially, they were highly restrictive about recruitment. For the first couple of centuries AD, recruitment was limited primarily to the regions of central Italy, places like Etruria, Umbria, Latium, the Roman heartland,
And some select provinces.
and a few select, highly Romanized provinces known for producing good soldiers like Spain, Macedonia, and Noricum. The idea was they were supposed to be the best of Roman citizens embodying Roman values.
What were the actual requirements? You couldn't just wander in off the street and sign up.
Absolutely not. You generally had to be older than a standard legionary recruit, typically between 15 and 32 years old, whereas legionaries often started younger, maybe 18 to 23.
15 seems quite young.
It does, but that might represent younger enlistees, perhaps serving in less demanding roles initially, or maybe it reflects the age range across the entire period. The key thing is they weren't just taking teenagers. They also required, supposedly, high moral character, an excellent physique, and critically powerful letters of recommendation and patronage.
So connections mattered. A lot.
Hugely. This wasn't just a physical job, it was a highly political posting. Getting your son into the Praetorian Guard was a major step up for a family. It was the Roman equivalent of a career fast track, putting you close to the center of power.
And let's circle back to that Augustan paradox, the need to keep up appearances, the Republican veneer. What did they have to wear when they were actually on duty inside Rome?
Right, inside the Pomerium. When they were on duty within those sacred city limits, they were required to wear the formal toga, the traditional symbol of Roman citizenship, over their military tunics. They weren't supposed to wear their full armor.
So they looked more like armed citizens than soldiers.
That was the idea, a visual distinction mandated by Augustus. It reinforced the notion that they were citizens fulfilling a protective civic duty, not some conquering military force occupying the capital. It was, frankly, a fragile, visible lie that masked the heavily armed military reality just beneath the surface.
A lie that eventually cracked. Which brings us right into part 3, the kingmakers. When did the guards stop even pretending to be just bodyguards and start openly leveraging their power?
The shift really begins, or at least accelerates dramatically, under Tiberius, and it's largely thanks to his infamous Praetorian prefect, Lucius Aelius Sejanus.
Sejanus, he's the one who truly grasped the power of the position.
He seems to have been the first prefect to fully understand the overwhelming political power inherent in controlling this unified elite force stationed right next to the capital. Remember, Augustus had strategically dispersed most of the cohorts outside Rome precisely to prevent this kind of centralized military threat.
So what did Sejanus do to undo that careful Augustan balance?
Sejanus became sole prefect in AD 15, consolidating command. Then, his masterstroke came in AD 26. He persuaded the aging and increasingly reclusive Tiberius to let him concentrate all 9 Praetorian cohorts, plus the 3 urban cohorts who handle day-to-day policing, into a single, massive, permanent barracks complex, the Castra Praetoria.
The Praetorian camp, where was it built?
Strategically placed just outside the old Servian wall on the Esquiline Hill, still very close to the city center, but technically outside the Pomerium initially.
So overnight, you go from having maybe 1,500, 3,000 Praetorians scattered discreetly around Rome to having upwards of 9,000 to 12,000 of the best paid, best armed soldiers in the world, unified under one command, ready for instant deployment at Sejanus' word.
It was a stroke of genius, if you define genius as political ruthlessness. It gave the god immense tangible power, and it gave Sejanus the instrument he needed to pursue his own colossal ambition.
Which was?
To basically take over the empire. He used his position, his influence over Tiberius, to systematically eliminate rivals. He even managed to poison Tiberius's own son and heir, Drusus the Younger. He came incredibly close to marrying into the imperial family and becoming Tiberius's designated successor.
The sources really paint him as almost succeeding. What finally stopped him? How did his plot unravel?
Tiberius, who was secluded on Capri by this point, was eventually warned, probably by his sister-in-law, Antonia Minor. He realized the extent of Sejanus' treachery. But arresting Sejanus was incredibly risky.
Because the Praetorians were loyal to him?
Exactly. Tiberius couldn't rely on the guard to arrest their own commander. So, in a carefully orchestrated move, Tiberius had to bypass the Praetorians entirely. He used the commander of the cohortus Vigilum, the firefighters, but also a paramilitary force named Macro, and crucially, the cohortes urbani, the urban cohorts, who were stationed in Rome but distinct from the Praetorians and not under Sejanus' direct command to surround the Senate, read out a letter denouncing Sejanus and arrest him. Sejanus was executed in AD 31.
Wow. So even the emperor had to use other troops to take down his own Praetorian prefect.
It just reinforced the central lesson for everyone involved, both emperors and the guard itself. Proximity to power plus unified military control equals near absolute political influence.
And the guard certainly learned that lesson well, which seems to usher in the age of assassination where the guard themselves become the primary actors. The first really big one, orchestrated by the guard, was the killing of Emperor Caligula in AD 41. What drove them to kill the emperor they were sworn to protect?
It seems to have been a toxic mix of things. Caligula's increasingly erratic and tyrannical behavior certainly played a part. There was widespread political disgust among the Senate and the elite. But critically, for the guard officers involved, it came down to personal insult and humiliation.
How so?
Caligula had developed this bizarre, cruel habit of publicly mocking his senior officers. The sources single out one tribune, Cassius Chaerea. Caligula apparently constantly ridiculed Chaerea, making crude jokes about his voice or perceived lack of masculinity. This wasn't just policy disagreement, it was deep personal hostility boiling over among the very men supposed to be his closest protectors.
So, the emperor's sheer lack of respect for his own elite soldiers was the breaking point. Amazing. And the moment Caligula was dead, what happened next? The Senate saw its chance.
They did. Predictably, the senators started debating in the forum, talking grandly about restoring the republic, ending the Principate altogether. Classic senatorial deliberation.
While Rome descended into chaos.
Exactly. While the senators were talking, the Praetorians were acting. They were busy pillaging the imperial palace. And it was in the midst of this chaos that a rank-and-file Praetorian, supposedly named Gratus, stumbled upon Caligula's uncle, Claudius,
The famous story of Claudius hiding behind a curtain.
That's the one. Terrified, apparently thinking the soldiers were there to execute him next as part of Caligula's family.
And this seemingly accidental discovery instantly changes Roman history.
Completely. Instead of killing him, the Praetorians recognized an opportunity. They basically grabbed the frightened Claudius, hauled him off directly to the Castra Praetoria, and proclaimed him emperor right there in the barracks square.
Bypassing the Senate entirely.
Totally. It was the first time an emperor had been installed solely by the Guard with absolutely no constitutional process or senatorial authority involved. And Claudius, who might have been underestimated but wasn't stupid, knew exactly who held the real power. What's the first thing he did?
Paid the donativum, that massive 5-year salary bonus we mentioned.
Precisely. He immediately confirmed the payments, cementing the Praetorians' role not just as kingmakers, but as the state's ultimate financial overlords. The throne was now officially secured, not by birthright or law, but by cold, hard cash paid directly to the Guard.
That moment really established the precedent, didn't it? The throne is for sale, effectively. And this cycle of violence, extortion, and instability reached its absolute catastrophic peak later in AD 69, the infamous year of the Four Emperors.
Oh, AD 69 is the Praetorian Guard's influence writ large in blood and chaos. They were instrumental throughout that whole year.
How did it start?
Well, first, they abandoned Nero when his regime collapsed. They backed the governor Galba, who marched on Rome and became emperor. But Galba, maybe trying to appear fiscally responsible or perhaps just displaying some misplaced old-school Republican principles, made a fatal error.
He refused the promised donativum.
He did. He refused the enormous bonus the Guard expected upon his accession, stating, and this quote is legendary, supposedly, "It is my habit to recruit soldiers and not buy them."
That's a great line for a history book. Terrible politics in AD 69 Rome.
Instantly fatal. His rival, Otho, who had been one of Galba's supporters, immediately saw his chance. Otho understood the game. He scraped together the money and bribed a small but key detachment of the Guard, just 23 speculators, the elite intelligence wing we'll talk more about later.
Bring 3 men.
That's all it took to start the ball rolling. They proclaimed Otho emperor, the rest of the disaffected Praetorians quickly joined him, and Galba, along with his chosen successor Piso, was brutally lynched right in the Roman Forum. Otho won simply because he understood the transactional nature of the Guard's loyalty. Pay up or perish.
But Otho didn't last long either.
No, the civil war continued. Otho was defeated by the Rhine legions supporting Vitellius, and when Vitellius took power, he made an unprecedented dramatic move regarding the Guard.
What did he do?
He disbanded the entire existing Praetorian Guard. The Italian-dominated force that had served the Julio-Claudians, he knew they were disloyal, easily bought, and had just killed one emperor and backed another loser. He couldn't trust them.
So who replaced them?
Vitellius brought in his own guys. He replaced the traditional 9 cohorts with a much larger force, 16 cohorts, totaling maybe 16,000 men composed entirely of legionaries drawn from his loyal German legions. A massive foreign occupying force, essentially.
But this huge replacement guard didn't last either, did it?
Nope. Vitellius's reign was also short-lived. He was overthrown by the end of the year by Vespasian, commanding the Eastern legions. AD 69 saw Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian as emperors. 4 in 1 year.
And Vespasian, the ultimate victor and the founder of the new Flavian dynasty, he was much more pragmatic about the guard, wasn't he? He understood you needed one, but you also needed control.
Absolutely. Vespasian was a military man and a realist. He disbanded Metellius's oversized German guard. He reduced the Praetorians back to the traditional 9 cohorts, maybe 10 for a while. He likely kept some of the existing men, but restored the structure. And critically, for control, he appointed his own son, Titus, as the Praetorian prefect.
Putting family in charge.
Right.
The ultimate loyalty check.
It was a clear message. The prefect must be absolutely trustworthy, part of the imperial inner circle. This move ensured stability for a generation under the Flavians. But the fundamental institutional flaw, the guard's ability to extort money and influence succession, remained baked into the system.
Which leads us inevitably to perhaps the most brazen, almost unbelievable moment in their entire 300-year history, the year AD 193. The year the Praetorians literally put the Roman Empire up for auction.
It really is perhaps the lowest point for the imperial office. Utterly shameful. What happened was the Guard had assassinated the new emperor Pertinax. He'd only reigned for about 3 months.
Why did they kill Pertinax?
Predictably, money. Pertinax was trying to restore discipline and fiscal responsibility after the excesses of Commodus. He refused to pay the guard the massive donativum they demanded, or at least not as much as they wanted, so they stormed the palace and killed him. And then, according to the historian Cassius Dio, they did the unthinkable. They basically retreated to the Castra Praetoria, barred the gates, and announced from the ramparts that the Roman Empire was for sale to the highest bidder.
How did they even rationalize that? Was it just pure, chaotic, short-term greed? Or did they genuinely think they could get away with maintaining this level of open extortion indefinitely?
It seems like catastrophic short-term greed, really. Driven by the absolute knowledge of their monopoly on power within the city at that moment, 2 senators actually came forward to bid. So Paesanus, Pertinax's father-in-law, ironically, bid from inside the camp, while Didius Julianus stood outside the gates bidding against him.
A literal auction for the throne. Who won?
Didius Julianus won. He offered the staggering sum of 25,000 sesterces per soldier, an absolutely immense amount. The Praetorians declared him emperor.
But this outrageous act, this blatant selling of the empire, surely that couldn't stand.
No. It shocked the entire Roman world, especially the powerful legionary armies out on the frontiers. It triggered immediate civil war. 3 different generals, Septimius Severus in Pannonia, Pescennius Niger in Syria, and Clodius Albinus in Britain, declared themselves emperor and prepared to march on Rome.
And this action finally triggers the Guard's first definitive, permanent dissolution and reformation. Septimius Severus, leading the powerful Danube legions, he got to Rome first.
Yes, Severus marched rapidly on Rome, refusing to recognize Julianus. His move was a strategic masterstroke, showing real military thinking mixed with political cunning.
What did he do to the Praetorians who had backed Julianus?
He played them perfectly. As he approached Rome, he sent messages ahead, basically telling the Praetorians who had killed Pertinax that if they handed over the assassins and came out of the city unarmed to swear allegiance to him, they would be pardoned.
And they fell for it.
They did. Didius Julianus had already been killed by this point. The Praetorians marched out of Rome, left their weapons behind as ordered, and assembled on the Campus Martius. Severus surrounded them with his own loyal troops. He then delivered a blistering speech, berating them for their treachery, greed, and cowardice. He stripped them of their ornate uniforms and elite insignia right there on the field, dishonorably discharged the entire guard, and banished them from coming within 100 miles of Rome on pain of death. The ringleaders, the actual murderers of Pertinax, were executed.
Wow, that wasn't just punishment, it was a fundamental social and military reset.
Exactly. Severus understood Rome still needed an imperial guard, but he completely eliminated the old system that tied the guard to Italian privilege and political corruption. He replaced the disgraced Italian guard with a new, larger force, maybe 15,000 men, initially transferred directly from his own battle-hardened legions.
Mostly from where?
Mostly from Illyria and the army of the Danube. Tough, experienced soldiers whose loyalty was primarily to him as their commanding general, earned through shared experience in the field, not through political connections in Rome or proximity to the palace. The Guards ceased being a privileged social club and became, at least for a time, a truly elite military force.
That's a huge transformation. Okay, before we track their final decline and dissolution, we need to pause and focus on how this complex, powerful machine actually worked internally. Part 4. Let's really dissect the organization, the ranks, and the specialized forces that made up the Praetorian Guard.
Absolutely. And we have to start again with the Praetorian prefect, because this role, as we hinted, transformed dramatically over time. It went from being purely a military commander to arguably the second most powerful position in the entire empire.
Augustus started with 2 prefects, right? As a check.
Yes, usually 2 held the post concurrently in the early days, but fairly quickly, especially from Sejanus onwards, it became common for one man to hold the position alone, concentrating immense power.
And the power of this single prefect just ballooned. What exactly did they command? What were the limits of their jurisdiction?
Well, there were almost none, eventually. From Vespasian's time onward, the position was usually held by an equestrian, someone from the rank just below senator, but the actual power far exceeded that formal rank. The prefect commanded not just the Praetorian cohorts themselves, but usually also the urban cohorts in Rome, and later the emperor's personal cavalry guard, the Equitus Singularis Augusti.
So basically all the troops in and around the capital.
Pretty much. But critically, their power expanded far beyond the military sphere. This is where the role gets truly fascinating and unique.
How so? They weren't just generals.
No. They acquired vast judicial and administrative powers. They oversaw grain supplies for Rome sometimes, commanded troops in Italy outside Rome, And crucially, they gained significant legal jurisdiction. By the 3rd century, the Praetorian prefect was often the empire's chief legal official, presiding over their own court, hearing appeals from across the empire. Essentially, they became second only to the emperor in administrative and judicial importance.
So you have guys like the famous jurists Pacinian and Ulpian serving as Praetorian prefects.
Exactly. That shows you the position demanded first-rate legal and administrative skills alongside military command. The irony, of course, is that both Papinian and Ulpian, these brilliant legal minds, were eventually assassinated by the very Praetorian soldiers they commanded. It demonstrates that even a powerful, respected prefect couldn't always control the violent potential of the guard itself. The machine could devour its own masters.
Incredible. Okay, let's look inside the cohorts themselves. The structure basically followed standard Roman military lines, right? Led by tribunes and centurions.
Yes, the internal structure was broadly similar to a legion, but with some key differences reflecting their elite status. Each cohort was commanded by a tribune who was typically of equestrian rank. Below the tribune were the centurions commanding centuries, though Praetorian centuries might have been larger than legionary ones.
For their special ranks.
There was the Tracinarius, who was the senior centurion of the first cohort, a very prestigious position, possibly commanding the speculators originally. And within the ranks, a soldier could progress. You'd start as a basic miles soldier, then potentially become an immunis exempt from basic chores, maybe with special skills like a clerk or a medic. Then you could rise to principalis, holding junior officer roles like an optio, assistant to the centurion, or a signifer, standard bearer, often earning double pay.
But what about the path for the truly ambitious Praetorian? If you wanted to reach the top, become a tribune of the guard yourself. The career track was quite specific and, well, circular, wasn't it?
It was a very interesting, complex path, seemingly designed to maintain both the Guard's elite status and ensure its officers had genuine military experience. You couldn't just rise through the ranks entirely within the Praetorian Guard in Rome to become a tribune.
So staying in Rome wasn't enough for the top jobs.
No. This is the crucial detail. To gain the necessary authority, prestige, and likely the required field experience to command Praetorian cohorts effectively, an ambitious centurion often had to transfer out of the guard and into a regular legion serving on the frontiers.
Really? Leave the comfort of Rome for the Rhine or Danube?
Seems so. There, they had to prove themselves in actual combat and command, working their way up through the legionary centurion ranks until they hopefully achieved the pinnacle, the rank of primus pilus, the senior centurion of the entire legion. A hugely respected and demanding position.
And only after successfully holding that top legionary rank.
Only then, after proving their mettle in the tough reality of frontier warfare and legionary command, could they typically expect to be promoted back to Rome, this time appointed as a tribune in the Praetorian Guard or the urban cohorts.
That requirement is fascinating. It ensures that the men leading the, let's be honest, often pampered troops in Rome had actually served hard time on the frontiers. It must have been an attempt to prevent the Praetorian officer corps from becoming entirely isolated, politically connected, but militarily ineffective.
It seems like a conscious effort by various emperors, perhaps especially the Flavians and later, to try and professionalize the Guard's leadership, even if they couldn't fully stamp out the political maneuvering and corruption lower down. It aimed to bridge the gap between the elite capital garrison and the realities of the wider army.
Okay, beyond the standard infantry structure, the Guard also had crucial specialist units within it. Tell us about the cavalry, and especially that shadowy intelligence corps.
Right, so within the Guard structure, Praetorians could transfer to the Praetorian cavalry, the Equites Praetoriani. This usually happened after maybe 5 years of infantry service. They operated in small squadrons called turmae, typically about 30 men each, providing mounted escorts and patrols.
But the really feared unit, the one involved in all the intrigue, was the Speculatores Augusti. Right?
Exactly, the Speculators Augusti. Originally perhaps scouts or messengers in the legions, under the emperors they evolved into the emperor's close personal protection detail and his primary intelligence and clandestine operations corps.
How many of them were there?
Probably around 300 total, maybe 30 attached to each Praetorian cohort. They were the emperor's eyes and ears within the palace and the city. They were responsible for sensitive arrests, carrying out executions, shadowing political rivals, and generally handling the dirty work of state security. Being a speculator put you incredibly close to the emperor, making them individually powerful and collectively dangerous. Otho used just 23 of them to launch his coup, remember?
And their role shifted dramatically after Emperor Domitian was assassinated in AD 96. Trajan, his successor, decided to make a fundamental change in who guarded him personally. Why?
Well, Domitian was assassinated in a palace conspiracy, likely involving members of his own household and possibly Praetorian elements, or at least a failure of protection by the speculators. Trajan, coming to power after this, clearly distrusted the existing setup. The speculators were too close, too embedded in palace politics, too potentially compromised.
So what did Trajan do?
Trajan instituted a critical change. He effectively sidelined the speculators from the role of immediate, close personal protection. He replaced them with a completely new, distinct corps, the Equites Singulares Augusti, the emperor's personal cavalry.
So he swapped out this covert intelligence group for a more visible, maybe more loyal cavalry unit.
Precisely. The Equites Singulares Augusti were modeled on the provincial governor's personal guards, singulares. They were often recruited from auxiliary cavalry units, particularly Batavians and Germans known for their loyalty and fighting skill rather than Italians. They were essentially a public, ceremonial, but also highly effective bodyguard force, directly answerable to the emperor, not integrated into the Praetorian cohorts.
And what happened to the old speculators?
Trajan seems to have effectively demoted them. The existing 300 or so speculators were reassigned back into the regular Praetorian cohorts, losing their special status as the primary close protection unit. They likely continued intelligence functions, but the bodyguard role passed to the Equites Singulares. It was a clear move by Trajan to distance himself from the toxic proximity and political leverage that the old speculator system represented. More layers of security, less reliance on one potentially compromised group.
It's fascinating how quickly imperial paranoia, or maybe just prudence, shaped military reform right at the heart of power. Okay, before we move on to the final act, let's briefly touch on their look. They were the elite. They had to look the part, didn't they? Their equipment and insignia.
They absolutely did, both inside and outside the city. When deployed outside Rome for combat, say, accompanying the emperor on campaign, they generally wore standard, high-quality Roman military armor, maybe the laminated lorica segmentata or scale armor, lorica squamato, or mail, lorica hamata. They carried the heavy javelins, pila, and the gladius sword.
But their distinction lay in the craftsmanship and the symbols.
Exactly. You'd expect their gear to be of the highest quality. Their helmets, the galea, were often more elaborately decorated than standard legionary ones, maybe with plumes or crests. Their shields, the scuta, were often the curved, oval type rather than the rectangular legionary shield, although both were probably used. And these shields were decorated with unique imperial symbols.
Like what kind of symbols?
Things that clearly marked them as the emperor's own. We see depictions of wings and thunderbolts referencing Jupiter, the chief god of the Roman state. And, uniquely associated with the Praetorians, we often see scorpions, the symbol of Tiberius's birth sign, possibly adopted under him, as well as stars and crescents. These weren't just functional items, they were statements of status and allegiance.
And the lion skin capes.
Yes, occasionally standard bearers, signiferi, or maybe even officers, are depicted wearing lion skins, similar to the aquilifers of the legions, again emphasizing their elite status and connection to imperial power and imagery, like Hercules. Their visual presence was definitely meant to be impressive, even intimidating.
Right, awe-inspiring, as you said. Okay, let's follow this thread now to part 5. The major transformation under Septimius Severus and their eventual final dissolution. That Severan redesign in 193 AD, where he kicked out the Italians and brought in the frontier legionaries, that was a real watershed moment, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a fundamental culture change for the Guard. By replacing the old, privileged, often politically connected Italian cohort soldiers with the best, toughest, most experienced legionaries from places like Illyria and the Danube armies, Severus basically stripped away the Guard's aristocratic, civilian-connected identity.
They became purely military.
Essentially, yes. They were now primarily an elite military force, selected for combat effectiveness and proven loyalty to the emperor as their commander-in-chief on the battlefield, rather than being chosen for their Italian birth or connections, or seeing the emperor primarily as a source of political payouts. It was a major professionalization in a sense, even if it also tied the Guard's fate even more closely to the success or failure of their specific emperor in the ongoing civil wars.
But even this hardened, restructured, more militarized Guard, they couldn't fully escape the internal violence and political meddling, could they? They had become too structurally powerful, perhaps. We still see signs of decline and instability, especially in the chaos of the 3rd century crisis.
Absolutely. The institution itself, regardless of the origin of its soldiers, held too much power concentrated in the capital. The machine was still prone to turning inward, especially when emperors were weak or contested. We see this clearly in 238 AD.
What happened then?
Well, it was another chaotic year. The reigning emperor, Maximinus Thrax, himself a soldier emperor, was unpopular with the Senate. While the main Praetorian force was away on campaign with Maximinus, their headquarters back in Rome, the Castra Praetoria, was actually attacked by an angry civilian mob supporting rival emperors backed by the Senate, Gordian III and VII.
Civilians attacking the Praetorian barracks.
Yeah, it shows the level of hatred and instability. The Praetorians remaining in the camp fought them off. But even while facing this external pressure from the populace, they were still the source of internal instability. Later that same year, after Maximinus was killed, and the Senate had appointed two of their own, Pupienus and Balbinus, as co-emperors.
The Praetorians reverted to type.
They did. Resenting the senatorial emperors and probably fearing for their own position, the Praetorians stormed the palace yet again and murdered both Pupienus and Balbinus. They then proclaimed the young Gordian III, grandson of Gordian I, as emperor, someone they presumably felt they could control more easily. Old habits died hard.
So even Severus's military reforms couldn't fully break the cycle of assassination and king-making. If the Guard was still prone to this kind of violence, what finally began to seriously chip away at their centralized power?
That really starts with Emperor Diocletian, beginning around 284 AD. Diocletian's reforms were aimed at stabilizing the entire empire after decades of crisis, and a key part of that was restructuring the imperial administration and, crucially, where the emperors actually lived and ruled from.
He moved the imperial residence away from Rome.
Exactly. Diocletian established his primary capitals in places like Nicomedia in Asia Minor, and his co-emperors under the Tetrarchy system resided in other strategic centers like Milan, Trier, or Sirmium. Rome remained the symbolic capital, but it was no longer the primary administrative or residential center for the emperors.
And that spatial move away from Rome must have been devastating for the Praetorians' influence.
Absolutely devastating. Their entire power base was built on proximity to the emperor in the palace in Rome. If the emperor isn't living there anymore,
then their role as the central palace guard diminishes dramatically.
Precisely. They were gradually replaced in the role of immediate imperial protection by new, highly trusted elite guard units created by Diocletian, named symbolically after the senior and junior emperors of the Tetrarchy. The Ioviani, after Jupiter, Diocletian's patron deity, and the Herculeani, after Hercules, Maximian's patron deity. These new guards traveled with the emperors.
So what happened to the Praetorians back in Rome and the Castra Praetoria?
The Castra Praetoria in Rome was essentially reduced to a minor garrison post. The Praetorian Guard still existed. They were still considered an elite unit, but they had lost their central, critical, career-making proximity to the imperial person and the heart of political power. They were sidelined.
So they were effectively demoted, decentralized in terms of importance, and replaced as the primary personal security. But the final definitive end, the actual abolition of the Guard, came a few decades later, didn't it? During the civil wars of the early 4th century.
That's right. They made one last political gamble and they bet on the wrong horse. When Constantine the Great began his rise to sole power, challenging his rival Maxentius, who controlled Italy and Rome.
The Praetorians backed Maxentius.
Yes. The remnants of the old Praetorian Guard, still stationed in the Castra Praetoria in Rome, threw their full allegiance behind Maxentius. They formed the core of his army in Italy.
And when Constantine marched south and met Maxentius's forces decisively at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome in 312 AD.
The Praetorians were there fighting fiercely for Maxentius in the center of his line, but Constantine's forces won a crushing victory. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber during the rout, and for the Praetorians who had backed him, this defeat was the final nail in their coffin.
Constantine's decision was absolute, wasn't it? No reforming them this time.
No. Constantine saw the Praetorian Guard as an anachronism, a symbol of past pagan power. He was moving towards Christianity, and a perpetual source of internal instability and disloyalty rooted in Rome. He wasn't going to risk them turning on him later. He definitively disbanded the remaining cohorts.
What happened to the soldiers?
They weren't necessarily all executed, but they were scattered. Sent off to legions serving on the distant frontiers, effectively dispersed across the empire where they could no longer act as a unified political force in the capital. Their very identity as Praetorians was erased.
And for the ultimate symbolic act, to show this was truly the end.
He demolished their fortress. Constantine the Great systematically ordered the destruction of the Castra Praetoria, the barracks that had been their home and the symbol of their power for nearly 300 years. The walls were torn down brick by brick,
ensuring that the physical symbol and the actual locus of their internal power, the place where emperors were literally auctioned off, where plots were hatched, where dynasties rose and fell, was eliminated from the Roman landscape forever.
Exactly. It was a powerful statement. It inaugurated a new age in Roman governance, centered on Constantinople and new imperial structures, ensuring, or at least attempting to ensure, that the primary military threat would henceforth be external, coming from the frontiers, not internal, lurking right beside the throne.
What an incredible, violent, and ultimately self-destructive arc of history. They began as necessary, trusted protection for Republican generals,
Morph into this elite, privileged force under Augustus.
then transform into a mechanism of extreme financial greed, constantly driven by the lure of the next donativum.
Become the ultimate kingmakers, assassinating emperors and selling the throne.
Survive reforms and restructuring.
Only to finally become such a deep-seated liability that the system itself had to physically tear down their headquarters to survive. It really is the story of institutional corruption written in blood and gold across 3 centuries.
It truly is the ultimate cautionary tale about unchecked internal power, isn't it? They held that absolute monopoly on armed force within the capital, and that constant proximity to power just proved too great a temptation to resist time and time again. They were created to serve, but they very quickly realized they had the power to rule, or at least dictate who ruled, by proxy.
Yeah, the Praetorians are a stark reminder of that dynamic.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rome's complicated and often terrifying kingmakers, what should you, the listener, perhaps take away from this 300-year legacy of the Praetorian Guard?
Well, I think it raises a really important, maybe timeless question for you to consider. The Praetorian Guard's history shows us just how alarmingly thin the line between protector and master can become. If any security force, whether it's military, police, or even something else entirely, holds a monopoly on proximity to power and becomes the only internal arbiter of who rules and who falls, is it truly inevitable that they will eventually turn their weapons or their influence inward on the very system they are meant to defend?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Reflect on how powerful institutions, often established with the best intentions for security, can sometimes evolve into self-serving forces, and where the true stability of power ultimately resides. Is it in the guards or somewhere else entirely? Welcome to the Deep Dive. You might not know his name right off the bat, but believe me, about a century ago, this guy basically was adventure. He was way bigger than any travel influencer today, more famous, more charismatic. His whole life was this public spectacle.
Absolutely. We're talking about Richard Halliburton, born in 1900, died way too young in 1939. And you're right, he wasn't just, writing about stuff. He was performing it. He became this huge best-selling author, a lecturer who could pack giant auditoriums.
Thousands of people, right, just hanging on his every word.
Exactly. It was all built on this idea of rejecting conformity. He had this phrase he hated, a life of an even tenor. He wanted the opposite.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We've got a ton of sources here detailing this, well, short but incredibly spectacular life. We want to trace that philosophy, that need to avoid the routine, right up to how it all ended so suddenly, so mysteriously in the Pacific.
Yeah, and maybe the best place to start to really get a sense of his flair for showmanship is probably his most famous stunt. It really captures the essence of Halliburton.
Ah, you mean the Panama Canal, the 36 cents.
That's the one. He officially became the lowest tonnage vessel ever to pass through the canal.
And the toll.
Yeah, 36 cents.
It's just brilliant. So this is 1928. He shows up at the Panama Canal, and he's not just going to write about it. No, he decides he has to swim it.
The whole thing, 47 miles, through the locks, the channels, everything.
And this wasn't like a quick dip. We're talking, what, 50 hours in the water? Spread out, obviously, but still incredibly grueling.
Oh, yeah. But the genius part is how he used the rules. The Canal Authority, they charge tolls based on a ship's tonnage, its weight, basically. Halliburton argued, look, I'm providing my own propulsion, I'm a vessel, I should pay a toll.
And they went for it.
They did. The officials were apparently pretty amused, maybe a bit baffled, but they assessed him. They calculated his tonnage based on his body weight. about 140 pounds, I think.
So he gets registered as the SS Richard Halliburton, and the math works out to exactly 36 cents. That toll, unbelievably, still stands as the lowest ever paid.
It's pure Halliburton, isn't it? Taking this massive symbol of engineering and progress, physically inserting himself into it, and turning the whole thing into this amazing, record-breaking story. Performance art, really.
It really shows how he refused that normal life, how he made his own existence, as he put it, conglomerate and vivid.
Exactly. And that's what we need to dig into.
Yeah.
Where did that radical idea come from? And ultimately, how did it lead him to that final, fatal voyage?
All right, let's go back, section 1, the philosophy of no return. To understand the guy who'd swim the Panama Canal for pocket change, we need to know where he started. Brownsville, Tennessee, right? Pretty comfortable background.
Yeah, son of a civil engineer, a real estate guy.
Yeah.
So comfortable upbringing, very bright kid, good education. He went to Princeton, graduated in 1921.
And even back then, he was kind of prepping for this life.
You can totally see it.
Yeah.
The sources show he was chief editor for student papers, both at his prep school and the Daily Princetonian. And crucially, he loaded up on public speaking courses. He knew what he was doing.
He wasn't just aiming for a job. He was aiming for the spotlight. Being a captivating lecturer back then, that was like being a rock star.
Pretty much. But there were a couple of early things that might have really shaped his intensity, his view on life and death.
Like what?
Well, first, his health wasn't always great. Around 1915, he had some kind of rapid heartbeat issue, and he ended up spending time at the Battle Creek Sanitarium.
Oh, the Kellogg place with the cornflakes and enemas?
That's the one, John Harvey Kellogg's place.
Mhm.
Very eccentric, very focused on health, diet, exercise, the whole bizarre regimen. Being in that environment, so focused on the body's fragility, must have made an impression.
And wasn't there something else, something more personal?
Yeah, tragically, his younger brother, Wesley Jr., died suddenly in 1917. Losing a sibling like that, especially young, it often forces you to confront mortality head-on. Makes you realize life is short, unpredictable.
You can see how that would make someone determined not to waste a second.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that leads right into the famous clash with his dad. His father, the practical engineer, told him basically, get this travel bug out of your system, son, and settle down. Aim for a life in even tenor.
That phrase, it just lit a fire under him, didn't it? We have his reply, and basically his life's mission statement.
It really is. He said, I hate that expression. I intend to avoid that condition. He goes on, when impulse and spontaneity fail to make my way uneven, then I shall sit up nights inventing means of making my life as conglomerate and vivid as possible.
Wow. Just inventing ways to make life intense.
And then the kicker. And when my time comes to die, I'll be able to die happy, for I will have done and seen and heard and experienced all the joy, pain, and thrills, any emotion that any human ever had, and I'll be especially happy if I am spared a stupid, common death in bed.
That's intense. It's not just about travel. It's about feeling everything, maximizing life. It almost guarantees drama, doesn't it? He really felt young people had to go out and see the world before getting tied down.
Totally. A moral duty, almost. And he didn't hang around. Even before graduating, 1919, he takes off as a regular seaman on a freighter, the Octorara. Rough trip.
Yeah.
But it convinced him he could sell these stories.
And the first sale was tiny.
Yeah, like $150 from Field and Stream, just goes to show. But the lectures, that was his ticket. He had this infectious enthusiasm. Apparently his voice was a bit high-pitched, something he was maybe self-conscious about.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah, but his storytelling, his energy, it just blew people away. He became a huge star on the lecture circuit.
And that's where the Feekins agency came in.
Right, they're the big leagues for lecturers back then. Getting signed by them gave him access to huge audiences all over North America. People were hungry for these exotic tales. And that exposure directly led to his first massive bestseller, The Royal Road to Romance, in 1925.
And boom, instant celebrity.
International celebrity.
Yeah.
But even before that book hit, he was already putting himself in these incredible situations, witnessing history.
You mean in China, with the last emperor?
Exactly. 1922, Beijing. He manages to witness the last ceremonial marriage of Emperor Pui to Empress Wanrong. This is literally the end of an era, right before the royals are kicked out of the Forbidden City for good.
And he described it so vividly. The procession at like 4 in the morning, moonlit streets.
Yeah, a forest of blazing pennants and swaying lanterns, the bride in this sedan chair with a gold dragon roof, carried by nobles.
He followed it right to the gates of the Forbidden
He
City.
did. Watched her get carried through the gate of propitious destiny. And his description is perfect. The big doors slam shut. The princess becomes an empress, but she's heading straight into what he called a prison palace. He saw the beauty and the tragedy all at once.
That flair for drama really sets the stage for his next big move, right? The whole theatricalization of experience thing.
Absolutely. Section 2, adventure stunts. This is where he really innovates. He wasn't just the first guy somewhere remote. He made himself part of the story. He'd pick famous historical figures or events and, well, reenact them.
Like historical cosplay, but dialed up to 11.
Pretty much. But with real commitment, real risk sometimes. He'd attach himself to Ulysses or Cortez or Hannibal, recreate their journeys to make history feel alive for his readers back home.
So after Royal Road to Romance, his next big book was The Glorious Adventure, retracing Ulysses.
Yes, sailing around the Greek world. And pointedly, he made a pilgrimage to Skyros, the island where the poet Rupert Brooke was buried.
Brooke was huge then, right? A symbol of that lost generation after World War I.
Massive. And Brooke died young, lived intensely. Halliburton was deliberately linking himself to that ideal, reinforcing his own life philosophy.
Okay, then the American stunts. We covered the Panama Canal swim. He also retraced Cortez's conquest of Mexico.
Yeah, but for pure theater, you gotta love the Robinson Crusoe stunt. He goes to Tobago, where the novel's supposedly set, and literally becomes a castaway.
Didn't he actually get a costume made, like full goat skins?
He did. Just like Alexander Selkirk, the real guy who inspired Defoe. Halliburton gets this goatskin outfit, lives alone on the island, endures the heat and isolation, all so he can write about it authentically. It's method travel writing.
The physical commitment was nuts, too. Climbing the Matterhorn?
First documented winter ascent of Mount Fuji, super dangerous.
Yeah.
And maybe the craziest, descending not once but twice into the Mayan Well of Death, the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza.
To look for artifacts.
Yeah.
And remains.
Yep. Authorities apparently weren't thrilled, but that just added to the story, right? Risk was part of the brand. He was always getting into scrapes, like getting arrested at Gibraltar for trying to sneak photos of the defenses. It all just burnished the legend.
He definitely brought the world to American living rooms. But we should probably acknowledge, looking back, his perspective was very much of its time, right? The sources mention this.
Yeah, definitely. You have to read it through that lens. He was fascinated by other cultures, for sure, but there's an ethnocentrism there that can be, unsettling today.
Like his comments about the Seri people in the Southwest.
Right. He called them primitive and seemed sort of shocked they lived so close to, quote, presumably civilized Hollywood. It reflects the biases of the era.
And his descriptions of Shanghai. Blood Alley?
Yeah, he talks about interracial mingling. Observes, with a mix of maybe amusement and disapproval, the results of Chinese heritage mixing with European heritage, calling the results something to write home about. He's reporting on the racial ideas of the time, even while he's often dressing up in local clothes trying to connect.
It's a snapshot of early 20th century American views, which he was basically packaging and selling. But did his travels change him? Did his own views evolve?
It seems like they did, which is interesting. Early on, before he'd really seen much, he apparently had this virulent antipathy for democracy and even a hatred for the laboring class. Very much the privileged kid perspective.
But seeing the world softened that.
It seems like it. Later, he writes with real sympathy about the awful conditions of prisoners he met on Devil's Island. And a big turning point was visiting Soviet Russia. He wrote a piece called Straight Talk from Russia for his book 7 League Boots.
What was his take?
He was really put off by the lack of freedom, the political repression. And comparing that experience to America, he came out with this really strong, enthusiastic praise for American democracy. It's like the travel actually taught him to value the freedoms he might have initially dismissed. His worldview definitely broadened.
Okay, so moving into the 1930s, he's at the absolute peak of his fame, but maybe feeling the need to top himself.
Exactly, which leads us to section 3. The peak, the flying carpet, and the elephant. He needed something even bigger, more ambitious. So he decides to take to the skies. The Flying Carpet Expedition, 1930 to 32.
And he needed a pilot for this, right?
Yep, found a pioneer aviator named Moy Stevens. And the deal was classic Halliburton. Handshake agreement, no salary for Stevens, but unlimited expenses. Just go.
And the plane. A biplane. Open cockpit.
A Stearman C-3B biplane, specially modified. They called it the Flying Carpet. And think about the logistics. Flying an open cockpit plane across the world in the early 30s during the Depression.
It sounds insane. How far did they go?
Get this, 18 months, over 33,000 miles, 34 countries. They started in LA, shipped the plane to England, then flew across Africa, the Middle East, Asia.
Just navigating that must have been a nightmare.
Totally. Like crossing the Sahara to Timbuktu. They relied on prearranged fuel dumps set up by Shell Oil. Incredible coordination.
And they weren't just sightseeing, they were part of that early aviation world.
Right. They hung out with the French Foreign Legion. They even helped out a German woman aviator, Ellie Beinhorn, when her plane broke down. Halliburton was so impressed he wrote the intro for her book.
The stories from that trip are just legendary, flying royalty around.
Oh yeah. Took the Persian crown princess flying, flew the young crown prince Ghazi of Iraq right over his school. Imagine being one of those kids.
But the Everest photo, that's the big one.
Unbelievable. They fly past Mount Everest. Halliburton stands up in the open cockpit, freezing cold, thin air, wind blasting, and snaps the first aerial photo of Everest for the Maharaja of Nepal, who was apparently blown away.
Just pure spectacle. And then there's the Borneo story.
Ah, yes. The shrunken heads. So in Borneo, guests of the White Raja, they give a ride in the flying carpet to the chief of the local Dayak headhunters.
And as a thank you.
As a thank you, the chief presents them with a parting gift. 60 kilograms, that's 130 pounds of genuine shrunken heads.
Oh my God, what do you even do with that?
Exactly. They couldn't refuse that. That would have been a massive insult. But picture them trying to stuff 130 pounds of shrunken heads into this tiny biplane. The source says they basically had to dump them as soon as possible. Somewhere out there. Who knows?
That story alone probably sold books. Which it did, right? The Flying Carpet book was huge.
Colossal. The trip cost him over $50,000, which was an insane amount of money in the Depression.
But the payoff.
The book earned $100,000 in royalties in the first year. Doubled his money in the worst economy ever. He wasn't just an adventurer. He was incredible at marketing that adventure.
He still wasn't done with the historical reenactments, though, was he? 1935, he decides to be Hannibal.
Yep. Hannibal's encore. Childhood dream. He wants to cross the Alps like Hannibal did. Not walking, not flying.
On an elephant.
On an elephant. He gets one from a Paris zoo, names her Ms. Dalrymple, and leads her over the Alps from Switzerland to Italy. Just the image of it. It's so perfectly, absurdly Halliburton, all for the story.
But even after all that success, things started to shift by the late 30s. His star was maybe fading a bit.
Yeah, it seems like the public's appetite was changing. Maybe he wasn't quite the sensation he had been. He needed something huge, something undeniable to recapture the spotlight.
Which brings us to Section 4, the final voyage, the Sea Dragon expedition.
This was meant to be the ultimate stunt.
Yeah.
Sail a traditional Chinese junk 75 feet long, named the Sea Dragon, all the way from Hong Kong across the Pacific.
And arrive where?
The goal was to sail right into the Golden Gate International Exposition happening in San Francisco in 1939. A grand entrance, the ultimate East meets West adventure narrative.
Okay, the vessel itself. A Chinese junk, built in Kowloon.
But modified, right?
Yeah, well, Wenshaw-style junk. But they added a diesel engine, and it had this big, colorful dragon painted on the stern. Looked dramatic, probably.
But the construction was problematic.
Oh, no, a nightmare. Halliburton himself wrote that if you wanted to go violently insane, you should try building a jump in a Chinese shipyard during the Sino-Japanese War. Costs spiraled, massive delays, constant engineering screw-ups.
And these weren't minor issues. The sources are really clear about major technical flaws.
Extremely clear. The Finnish Sea Dragon was fundamentally unsound, described as distinctly top-heavy. It rode way too low in the water. Experts actually warned him.
Like the chief officer of the SS President Coolidge, the ship that eventually had the last contact. Exactly. That officer pointed out the masts and sails were way too heavy for the whole design. And crucially, the poop deck, that raised part at the back, was built 10 feet higher than on a traditional junk of that size.
10 feet. That completely throws off the center of gravity.
Massively destabilizing. They tried to compensate by pouring 10 tons of concrete ballast into the hull, but that's just a past job on a vessel that was structurally compromised from the start. And he planned to sail this across the Pacific.
The money situation was bad too, right? Sponsors weren't biting.
Nope. Big companies like Buick apparently said, no way. They didn't want their brand associated with something literally called a junk. It sounds almost comical, but it was serious.
So where did the money come from?
Mostly his personal network. Wealthy relatives helped out, and significantly, 3 young Dartmouth guys who signed on as crew chipped in a huge chunk, like $14,000 out of the $26,500 budget. It shows how desperate he was to make it happen.
And the first attempt to even leave Hong Kong was a disaster. February 39.
Total failure.
Yeah.
A terrible omen. They had to turn back after just a wunk. The crew was falling apart, dysentery, maybe even STDs from shore leave.
His secretary, Paul Mooney, broke an ankle.
Yep. And one of the Dartmouth guys got hit by the mainsail boom. The boat was clearly hard to handle, dangerous. Halliburton himself was apparently run down, suffering from nervous exhaustion, but he wouldn't quit.
Despite all the warnings, the bad design, the money troubles, the crew problems, that failed start, he pushed ahead. The story was more important.
The pressure to deliver that next big spectacle must have been immense. So they did quick repairs, got a new crew together with Captain Welch, and set out again on March 4th, 1939.
And about 3 weeks later.
3 weeks later, March 23rd, they're about 1,200 miles west of Midway Island, and they sail straight into a monster typhoon. Reports said the waves were hitting 40 feet.
That top-heavy, unstable junk, it stood no chance.
Absolutely none. The nearest ship was the President Coolidge, maybe 400 miles off, and March 24th, Captain Welch sends that last famous radio message.
It's almost unbelievable knowing what was happening. So cheerful.
Chillingly cheerful. It read, "Southerly gales, squalls, lee rail underwater, hardtack, bully beef, wet bunks, having wonderful time, wish you were here instead of me."
Wow, having wonderful time, and then silence.
Well, one more transmission came through, just their position. 31.12 north, 155.00 east. And that was it. The last anyone ever heard from the Sea Dragon.
And the aftermath. The search was delayed because they thought it was a stunt.
That's what the sources suggest, and it's just tragic. The Coast Guard in Hawaii apparently hesitated. They figured, oh, it's Halliburton. He's probably fake disappearing for publicity.
The ultimate irony. The one time it was terrifyingly real.
They assumed it was performance. Precious time was lost. By the time the Navy launched a massive search covering over 150,000 square miles, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
He was declared legally dead later that year, October 1939.
Yeah. And the only possible trace ever found was about a year later, 1940. Some flotsam, maybe the ship's rudder, was spotted way out in the Pacific. Just confirmed the obvious. The Sea Dragon had been destroyed.
Such a dramatic end for such a dramatic public figure. Let's talk a bit about Section 5, personal context and his legacy. Publicly, he was this dashing adventurer, often seen with young women. But privately,
the reality was more complex, as the sources show. He never married. And while, yeah, the public image was very much the ladies' man, probably necessary for the brand back then, his closest companions, emotionally and it seems physically, were men.
Like who?
Well, he had close friendships with people like the movie star Ramon Navarro, the wealthy philanthropist Noel Sullivan. They shared this kind of bohemian circle. But his most constant companion and collaborator was his secretary, the journalist Paul Mooney.
And there's actual documentation about his private life.
There is. French police reports from 1935 surfaced later. They noted him as, quote, a homosexual well known in some specialized establishments, and mentioned him soliciting on a particular street in Paris.
It puts his public persona in a different light, doesn't it?
It really does. That hyper-masculine, romantic adventurer image, it functioned partly as a disguise, maybe a necessary shield in that era, allowing him to live his private life while maintaining this huge public profile. His charisma kept the myth separate from the man.
But despite the tragedy of his death, his influence was massive, wasn't it? On writing, on journalism.
Oh, huge. Major writers like Paul Theroux, Susan Sontag have cited his influence.
Yeah.
And get this, Walter Cronkite, the news anchor icon, he specifically credited seeing Halliburton lecture in the 30s as the thing that pushed him into journalism. Halliburton made reporting look like the ultimate adventure.
And his books, especially the books of marvels, they were basically geography lessons for millions of kids, right?
Absolutely. Staples in school libraries for generations. They opened up the world for so many young Americans, made it exciting, understandable.
Though he did perpetuate one famous myth.
Yes. The Great Wall of China thing. In his second book of Marvels, he wrote that the Great Wall is the only man-made object visible from the moon. Totally untrue, of course, but many think he's the source of that incredibly persistent urban legend.
And he left behind actual physical monuments, too, that house in California.
The Hangover House, Laguna Beach, 1937, commissioned from architect William Alexander Levy. It's this incredible modern structure, concrete and steel, just clinging to a cliff 400 feet above a canyon.
It looks exactly like something he'd built, a physical rejection of the even tenor.
Totally. It had 3 bedrooms. One for him, with a huge world map, one for Paul Mooney, and one for the architect. It was apparently so dramatic.
That Ayn Rand based a house in the Fountainhead on it. Heller House.
That's the theory. She visited in 37, and the descriptions fit. They capture that same kind of defiant, individualistic spirit.
And the final irony might be the memorial tower built by his father.
Right. The same dad who told him to settle down ends up donating a fortune, $400,000, to build the Richard Halliburton Memorial Tower at Rose College. The man who fled permanence gets this massive stone tower in his name.
So wrapping this up, the final takeaway. Looking back at Halliburton's whole life, it really feels like he lived out his own script, didn't he? He absolutely made his life conglomerate and vivid.
He did. He was the ultimate symbol for a generation wanting more than routine. And he definitely avoided that stupid common death in bed he feared so much.
But the way it ended, it feels almost inevitable looking back. So many warnings about the sea dragon.
It really does. The bad design, the money problems, the failed start. It seems like an avoidable tragedy, really. Driven by that relentless need to keep the Halliburton myth going to top the last adventure.
Which brings us to that final, haunting radio message. Having wonderful time, wish you were here instead of me. Sent as the ship was literally going down in a typhoon.
It leaves you with this huge question. Is that just tragic irony? The final, awful punchline to a performance that went too far cost him everything.
Or is it something else? Is it maybe the ultimate Halliburton act? The final theatrical flourish?
Right. Is it possible that even in the face of death, he was determined to control the narrative, to go out broadcasting that same cheerful, undaunted persona he'd crafted his whole life, ensuring the myth endured even as the man perished?
A final performance exactly on his own terms.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it, that the man who chased every thrill managed to script his own dramatic exit. Something for you to think about.
Until next time on The Deep Dive. Welcome to The Deep Dive, the place where we distill complex research into crystal clear knowledge just for you. Today we are undertaking a truly epic journey, strapping ourselves in for a grand tour of the outer solar system. We're visiting a world that completely upends our definition of where life can exist. Jupiter's icy moon, Europa.
Yeah, the smallest of the great Galilean moons, but definitely the one with the biggest potential secret. We're constantly flooded with news articles, proclaiming it the most likely place in our solar system to harbor extraterrestrial life.
Right.
But today, our goal is to move beyond the headline hype. For you, the learner, we're providing the essential shortcut to the hard science. We'll unpack the incredible celestial mechanics, the things that keep this water world liquid and dynamic, driven entirely by internal heat.
Exactly. Our mission is to understand the powerful physics that make Europa tick, based directly on the deep research material we have in front of us. To set the scene, just picture Europa. It's a planetary mass moon, maybe slightly smaller than our own moon, wrapped in this mantle of water ice. It presents as this startlingly white beige sphere, but it is far from pristine. If you zoom in, you see it's crisscrossed by these dark lines. They call them linea.
Right, the linea.
And these features are just clear evidence of a geologically young and incredibly active surface.
That surface activity, yeah, that's the first big clue about the heat source within. If Europa were just, a static ball of rock and ice, you would be cold, dead, cratered like Mercury or the far side of the moon.
Totally frozen.
Exactly. But because of its highly unusual orbital dynamics, that internal heat is continuously renewed. It keeps a vast ocean liquid underneath. This is why it's the centerpiece of the habitability conversation. So we really have to start with the foundational history. How did humanity first even lay eyes on this tiny, remarkable world?
Okay, history. Well, the discovery of Europa is a classic 17th century science tale. It's a bit tangled up in simultaneous observations. It dates back to 8 January 1610, found independently by Galileo Galilei and also potentially by the astronomer Simon Marius.
Yeah, and the sources really show the tricky nature of early telescope tech back then. Galileo first observed Io and Europa together the night before, January 7th. But because of the low resolution available to him, he couldn't resolve them.
Just blurry dots.
Just blurry points of light, exactly. He couldn't separate them as distinct bodies until the following evening.
And while Galileo got the credit for being first to publish his comprehensive observations, the naming convention we use today actually comes from Simon Marius. He later suggested the mythological names, though apparently he attributed the proposal to Johannes Kepler. And this decision really anchored the moon to mythology.
It's a very satisfying link, isn't it? Europa is named after the Phoenician mother of King Minos, and critically a lover of the Greek god Zeus.
Ah, Zeus.
And since the moon orbits the planet named Jupiter, who is the Roman counterpart to Zeus, the connection is perfect. These mythological names stuck, but actually only after centuries of disuse.
That's a fascinating historical detour because for centuries, astronomers mostly relied on that functional but maybe uninspiring Roman numeral system Galileo introduced.
Yes, Galileo originally numbered them in order of distance from Jupiter, so Europa was designated Jupiter the second satellite out. This designation was perfectly accurate, until subsequent discoveries completely upended the system.
Right, and this is where the history gets complicated for you, the learner. We're talking late 19th and 20th centuries. In 1892, Amalthea was discovered much closer in. Okay, so that pushed Europa out to the third position.
Up to down the list.
Exactly. Then the Voyager probes flew past in 1979 and discovered 3 more inner satellites.
So now, while Europa is physically the 6th satellite in distance from Jupiter, it retains that historical Roman numeral Jupiter II in older astronomical literature, which, can be highly confusing.
It can be.
It's a great example of how scientific understanding of a system, even just its basic head count, evolves as our technology improves. It's Jupiter's second moon, historically speaking.
Right. Okay, moving from the history books to the physics lab, we face the fundamental mystery. How does Europa, so incredibly far from the sun, stay warm enough to hold a liquid ocean? The answer, as you said, is gravity.
Precisely. The entire heat mechanism is governed by its orbital dynamics. Europa orbits Jupiter in just 3.55 Earth days at a mean radius of about 670,900 kilometers. The orbit itself is nearly circular with a tiny eccentricity of only 0.009.
A tiny eccentricity, but that slight imperfection is absolutely everything. If the orbit were perfectly circular, the immense gravitational pull of Jupiter would stabilize, right? And Europa would just freeze solid.
Correct. No variation, no heat.
Oh.
But because it is slightly elliptical, that gravitational pull oscillates. It waxes and wanes.
And like its larger siblings, Europa is tidally locked. One hemisphere always faces Jupiter. Our moon does the same with Earth.
Right. But here's a huge twist that the research highlights. Evidence suggests a non-synchronous rotation occurred in the past, maybe still occurring.
Non-synchronous rotation. Okay, that sounds technical, but it's crucial. It means the icy crust might be mechanically decoupled from the interior.
Yeah, think of it like a loose orange peel. The peel can spin independently from the fruit inside.
Okay, so the icy crust is the loose peel.
Allowed to spin slightly faster or slower than its orbit, separated by that liquid layer underneath.
And that decoupling, that separation, that's the clearest indicator of the underlying liquid layer, right? And it's directly related to the core heat source tidal flexing.
Exactly. This flexing is possible because Europa is caught in this dance, a mean motion resonance with Io and Ganymede. That maintains that vital, slight orbital eccentricity.
So as Europa swings closer to massive Jupiter, the gravity strengthens, it elongates the moon, creates internal stress.
Stretches it out.
Then as it swings further away, the pull weakens and it tries to relax back toward a perfect sphere. This constant, enormous gravitational kneading of its interior. That's what generates the immense heat, tidal dissipation. It drives all of Europa's geology.
And what's fascinating here is that we can deep dive into exactly where that heat actually manifests. We aren't just talking about generic friction. The sources really break down the mechanisms driving the incredible energy budget of this moon.
Okay, so where does the heat come from specifically?
Well, first, there's the idea of tidal friction and Rossby waves. This is where the ocean tides themselves moving around convert into heat through friction. Standard stuff, but there's a truly mind-boggling theory suggesting that because Europa has a small, tiny but non-zero axial tilt, just 0.1 degrees, Jupiter's gravitational influence can generate massive planetary-scale tidal waves within the liquid ocean. These are known as Rossby waves.
Rossby waves, like giant waves sloshing around inside the whole ocean.
Pretty much. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the scale is just astounding. Calculations suggest these theoretical Rossby waves could generate kinetic energy 2,000 times greater than the flow excited by the dominant, simpler tidal forces alone.
2,000 times greater. That's almost too efficient. Is there any pushback on that? Is that model widely accepted?
Well, it's still theoretical, absolutely. But the excitement comes from the fact that it could solve Europa's overall heat budget problem. If these gigantic waves dissipate their kinetic energy through friction, That energy conversion could be the principal heat source for the entire ocean, making sure it stays well above freezing, regardless of how much heat is coming up from the rocky mantle below.
Wow. Okay, so the ocean is potentially heating itself via these giant planetary waves. That's an incredible visual. But the heat isn't only affecting the liquid water, right? You also mentioned heat generated within the ice shell itself.
Exactly. Tidal flexing dissipation in the crystalline structure of the ice. New experiments have shown that when the ice lattice itself is constantly deformed by these tidal forces, the internal friction within the crystal structure generates heat.
Friction within the ice crystals.
Yes. And the research suggests this process alone could generate maybe an order of magnitude more heat in the ice shell than previously estimated. This finding is huge because it impacts our understanding of the ice's temperature profile and, crucially, how thick that rigid outer shell actually is.
Okay, and just for contrast, the source material notes that radiogenic heating, radioactive decay in the Rocky Mantle is present, but it's estimated to be way lower, like 100 times lower than the heat from tidal flexing.
Europa is purely a tidal world. It really is. Its lifeblood, its heat, its geology, everything is all powered by Jupiter's gravitational influence. And just to put the strength of this force in context for you, the tidal forces acting on Europa are about 1,000 times stronger than the moon's effect on Earth. We are talking serious cosmic leverage here.
1,000 times stronger. Okay, so we have this powerful engine driven by Jupiter's gravity and orbital mechanics. What's the crucial output we are all hoping to find? That legendary subsurface ocean.
Right. Based on its bulk density, Europa seems to have a composition similar to terrestrial planets. That means a primary structure of silicate rock, probably with a metallic iron core deep down.
Rock and metal core, standard enough?
Standard enough. But the attention is fixed entirely on that outer layer of water. It's estimated to be around 100 kilometers thick. And this massive layer includes both the solid ice crust on top and the vast liquid ocean beneath.
And the existence of this ocean, it really transitioned from speculation to near certainty thanks to the Galileo orbiter back in the late 1990s. Galileo detected an induced magnetic field. It results from Europa's continuous interaction with Jupiter's colossal magnetosphere.
And what's fascinating here is the physical requirement for that induced field. To generate it, you absolutely need a massive, highly electrically conductive layer in Europa's interior. Fresh water, not conductive enough. Frozen ice, definitely not conductive. The only plausible candidate is a giant subsurface ocean of salty liquid water.
That's the smoking gun, isn't it? Salt water conducts electricity, and when we talk about volume, it's truly staggering. Whether the ice is thick or thin, that liquid ocean beneath may be about 100 kilometers deep. That leads to a total water volume that is, 2 to 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined?
Yeah, it's a true global ocean, mind-boggling amount of water. Yet despite this overwhelming evidence for the ocean, there remains one of the greatest scientific controversies for you, the learner, following Europa science, the ice thickness debate. How thick is that shell separating us from the water?
Okay, the big debate. We have two major scientific camps.
Right. The thick ice model is currently favored by most geologists and geophysicists. This model estimates a solid, rigid ice crust somewhere between 10 to 30 kilometers thick, and that includes a ductile warm ice layer near the liquid interface.
So pretty thick ice. What's the evidence for that?
The evidence supporting this comes from looking at the large, older impact craters. The thinking is, if the ice were thin, a major impact would just punch right through.
Splash down.
Exactly. It would release liquid water, causing the crater to quickly collapse or form completely differently. Since we see large craters that appear to have been filled in with flat, fresh ice, but still retain some definition, proponents argue the ice must be thick enough to resist that rapid collapse, which means the ocean rarely, if ever, interacts directly with the surface in this model.
Okay, that makes sense. But then we have the thin ice model. This suggests the shell is only a few kilometers thick, at least in certain areas. And this implies regular, maybe ongoing contact between the liquid interior and the surface through open cracks and ridges, which could help form that chaotic terrain we see.
Right, so if the thick ice model is favored, how do we explain those massive jumbled chaos regions? Doesn't that just scream localized melting and turnover?
That's where the idea of subsurface lakes comes in. It kind of acts as a crucial compromise between the two models. Evidence suggests that some of those chaos terrain features, the really jumbled, rough spots, may actually sit atop vast, localized lakes of liquid water.
Lakes within the ice shell.
Exactly. Entirely encased within the icy shell, trapped maybe 5 or 6 kilometers down, distinct from the deep global ocean way underneath.
Okay, and that distinction is vital for habitability, right? Because if life is confined to these shallower, trapped lakes, the energy sources might be more limited, maybe transient.
Whereas if life is in the deep global ocean,
It potentially has access to long-term energy from the seafloor. Big difference.
let's look at the chemistry then, the water and the ice. For years, those reddish-brown streaks coating the surface fractures were a total mystery. Spectrographic evidence suggests they may be salts, like magnesium sulfate or potentially sulfuric acid hydrate, stuff deposited by evaporating water emerging from below.
And recent data has really strengthened the argument for active ocean surface exchange. We've detected a distinct absorption feature at 450 nanometers. It's characteristic of irradiated sodium chloride crystals, basically, table salt that's been zapped by radiation.
Table salt. Okay.
Finding irradiated salt in those chaos regions confirms areas of recent subsurface upwelling. It means the salty ocean water is interacting with the deep, rocky seafloor, transporting material up and then depositing it on the surface ice where it gets irradiated.
And tying back to the basic ingredients for life, the James Webb Space Telescope recently confirmed the presence of carbon on Europa, specifically concentrated as carbon dioxide in recently resurfaced terrain, an area called Terra Regio.
It's huge. It confirms that an internal source of carbon, which is absolutely necessary for life as we know it, exists and is being vented towards the surface.
Definitely. And if we return to those reddish streaks for a second, another major hypothesis is that they are composed of abiotic organic compounds called tholins.
Tholins.
Right.
These are incredibly complex, sort of tar-like substances created when radiation bombards simpler organic molecules like methane or ethane.
And why should you, the learner, care about tholins? Because from an astrobiological perspective, tholins are critical. They represent prebiotic chemistry in action. Their presence suggests that the raw organic building blocks for life are being continuously manufactured right there on Europa's surface, even if they aren't alive themselves.
And if we connect all these chemical findings together, models suggest that Europa's ocean has undergone a massive chemical evolution over its 4.5 billion years.
Huh?
Initially, it was likely quite acidic, high in sulfate, calcium, carbon dioxide, mostly derived from the ice itself.
But over cosmic time, as water continually interacts with that rocky mantle, driven by the tidal flexing,
The ocean evolves. It potentially transforms from a highly acidic brine into something much more chloride-rich, maybe even resembling the 1.94% chloride content of our own terrestrial oceans.
that dramatic shift in chemistry over time, that's a massive step towards potentially supporting Earth-like biology, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It changes the whole game for habitability.
Okay, so let's talk about that surface. When you look at high-resolution images of Europa, the contrast between the, pristine white ice and those active, cracked features is just striking. It is by far the smoothest known solid object in the solar system.
And that smoothness is a direct consequence of its young age. Its surface is estimated to be only 20 to 180 million years old. That's a blink of an eye in cosmic terms.
Barely adolescent.
Exactly. Thanks to active internal processes that constantly resurface it. The high albedo, its reflectivity 0.64, is another sign of this geological youth. Fresh ice is bright.
But the activity is most clearly seen in the lineae, those dark streaks that crisscross the globe. Close inspection shows that the crustal blocks on either side of these lines have moved relative to each other. It indicates spreading.
Yeah, the most convincing hypothesis is that these lineae are produced by eruptions of warmer ice, creating new crust as the original crust slowly spreads apart. It's very much analogous to Earth's mid-oceanic ridges, just, driven by icy processes rather than silicate rock convection.
Isologic ridges.
Something like that. And the lineae also provide the strongest physical evidence for that non-synchronous rotation we discussed earlier. The changing orientation of older fractures relative to younger ones tells a really interesting story.
How so?
Well, only the youngest fractures align perfectly with the predicted stress patterns from Jupiter's current tidal lock. The older the fractures get, the more their orientation shifts or rotates away from that alignment.
Ah, so the surface is slipping.
Exactly. It suggests Europa's outer rigid shell is rotating slightly faster, or maybe slower, than the interior mantle. It's slipping over the ocean layer.
The slipping means the subsurface ocean is successfully mechanically decoupling the ice from the mantle below. Based on comparing Voyager and Galileo photos taken years apart, scientists estimate a full rotation of that outer rigid shell relative to the interior takes at least 12,000 years.
Which is slow in human terms, but geologically undeniable motion. Furthermore, the research indicates evidence of true, active plate tectonics on Europa, which is just astonishing for an icy world.
Plate tectonics like on Earth.
Well, similar processes. We see clear evidence of crustal spreading at the linea and also convergence or subduction sites, where one plate of icy crust appears to be sinking and being recycled into the warmer, more ductile interior ice.
We must be careful, though, right? Because the physics driving Europa's plate tectonics are likely fundamentally different from Earth's. On Earth, plate movement is driven by massive convection currents in the mantle. On Europa, the forces resisting potential Earth-like motions in the ice crust are significantly stronger than the likely driving forces. It's a similar process subduction, but probably driven by different physics, possibly related to that tidal flexing.
That's a really important distinction. Moving beyond the cracks, we also see the lenticulae, or freckles. These are circular or elliptical features that manifest as domes, pits, or those jumbled chaos regions.
Freckles on the ice moon. What forms them?
The dominant structural hypothesis is that these are formed by diapers of warm ice. Think of huge buoyant blobs or bubbles of warmer, less dense ice rising up through the colder, rigid outer crust, much like magma chambers rising through Earth's crust.
Okay, like icy blobs rising up. And if that warm ice breaks through the surface...
Smooth, dark spots we see could be meltwater that was briefly released and then flash froze onto the surface. But the source material also offers alternative ideas for the chaos terrain specifically.
Such as?
Yes. Some researchers suggest that the chaos terrain might represent sites where impacting comets actually punched through a potentially thin ice crust and hit the underlying ocean directly.
Wow, a direct hit on the ocean.
Yeah, that would certainly create a jumbled, chaotic surface region due to the massive thermal shock and the resulting upheaval.
Okay, finally, we have to talk about the surface hazard that keeps mission planners awake at night, especially near the equator. It has been hypothesized that the surface may be covered in these icy spikes called penitentiae.
Penitentiae.
Yeah, these are common terrestrial features, actually. You often find them at high altitude in dry, cold environments on Earth. They're caused by sublimation ice turning directly into gas from direct overhead sunlight carving the ice away. On Europa, though, they could be gargantuan, potentially up to 15 meters high. 15 meters? That's like a 5-story building made of sharp ice spikes. That's terrifying for landing.
Absolutely terrifying. The available Galileo imaging simply doesn't have the resolution to confirm them one way or the other. But radar and thermal data are highly consistent with this speculation. If they exist, a lander mission trying to set down on the equator, where sunlight is strongest and sublimation highest, faces a truly daunting obstacle course. Okay, so given all this activity, the heat engine, the ocean, the active surface, what provides the most immediate connection between the inside and the outside world? The answer likely lies in Europa's incredibly tenuous atmosphere and, perhaps more excitingly, the possible plumes erupting from its poles.
Right, the atmosphere. Europa possesses a very thin atmosphere. Technically, it's an exosphere, composed primarily of molecular oxygen. But we must be crystal clear here. This oxygen is generated non-biologically.
Yes, absolutely crucial point. The mechanism is called radiolysis. Europa is deep inside Jupiter's powerful magnetosphere, so it's bombarded constantly by highly charged particles. Solar UV radiation and these charged particles collide with the surface water ice. This massive energy impact breaks the molecular bonds of H2O, generating water vapor, which is then immediately dissociated, broken apart into hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay, so radiation splits the water ice. What happens then?
The lighter hydrogen escapes Europa's weak gravity almost immediately, just floats away into space. But the heavier molecular oxygen, O2, is left behind. It accumulates to form a relatively dense component of the exosphere that can reach up to maybe 190 kilometers high.
Now, this oxygen production is the first major tie-in to habitability, isn't it? A pivotal finding suggests that some of this radiolytically generated oxygen might not just stay in the exosphere, it may get absorbed into the ice crust
And transported down to the subsurface ocean via geological turnover.
Yeah.
Specifically through those subduction processes we discussed where ice plates sink back down.
This is potentially a massive life-sustaining mechanism if the ice shell is actively moving and recycling itself. Estimates suggest this geological process could lead to oceanic free oxygen concentrations comparable to those found in Earth's deep oceans.
And potentially achieving that level within only maybe 12 million years.
Right.
which is geologically quite fast.
Wow.
That is a timeline that suggests complex, multicellular life forms, not just simple microbes, could potentially be supported, assuming they have an energy source to go with the oxygen. So the ocean is large, salty, potentially warm, and potentially oxygenated. 3 out of the 4 main requirements for complex life as we know it.
It ticks a lot of boxes.
Mm.
However, the downside of being so close to Jupiter is that crushing radiation environment. Europa is deep within Jupiter's magnetosphere. It receives a lethal daily dose of about 5.4 sieverts necessity right at the surface.
Yeah, and to put that 5.4 sievert dose into human context for you, a single dose of 5 is usually considered fatal within days or weeks. Europa gets that every single day.
Say every day. Okay.
This is a critical constraint for mission planning. It forces engineers to design spacecraft that are either extremely heavily shielded, which adds mass and cost, or, ideally, that minimize their time near the surface.
Which explains exactly why the scientific community is so obsessed with the geysers, the cryovolcanic plumes, if they exist and are active.
We don't need to touch the surface at all. Hubble first detected hints of water vapor plumes erupting from near the South Pole. They were estimated to be up to 200 kilometers high.
200 kilometers. That's more than 20 times the height of Mount Everest, shooting water vapor into space.
Just incredible scale. And the eruption rate is estimated at maybe 7,000 kilograms per second. That's significantly higher than the plumes observed on Saturn's moon Enceladus, suggesting a very vigorous process underneath.
And the timing of the plumes is also telling, right? They might be episodic.
Exactly. They seem to appear when Europa is farthest from Jupiter in its slightly elliptical orbit. This is entirely consistent with tidal force modeling predictions. It links the eruptions directly back to the orbital dynamics and the varying stresses caused by Jupiter's pull. The ice cracks open more easily when the stress is just right.
So the profound implication for exploration is crystal clear. If confirmed, flying a spacecraft like the upcoming Europa Clipper through these plumes offers an unparalleled opportunity. We could sample the subsurface ocean chemistry directly, analyze it in situ for habitability markers, salts, organics, even biosignatures, without ever having to face the immense challenges of landing.
It's the dream scenario for sampling. But here is the critical debate NASA is currently focusing on regarding the plumes. A bit of complication. Recent models suggest the plumes could originate not from the vast, deep global ocean, but instead from migrating liquid water pockets trapped within the crust itself, like the subsurface lakes we mentioned.
Ah, okay. Why does that distinction matter so much from lakes versus the global ocean?
Well, NASA has noted that if the plumes come from these shallower, potentially isolated crustal pockets, those pockets might be less hospitable to life over the long term. They would primarily lack a substantial continuous energy source, like the hydrothermal vents hypothesized to exist on the deep global ocean floor where the water meets the silicate rock. It shifts the whole calculation about the potential complexity and stability of any life present. Are we sampling the main ocean or just a little pocket near the surface?
Okay, we've established the incredible potential of Europa. It's this dynamic, potentially habitable world. Now we must ask, when do we physically go look? Early exploration in the 70s with Pioneer 10 and 11 gave us only fuzzy images. It was really the Voyager probes in 79 that gave us the detail leading to the liquid ocean speculation.
But the foundational data, the bulk of what we knew for decades, came from the Galileo space probe. It orbited Jupiter from 1995 to 2003 and conclusively confirmed that induced magnetic field. More recently, the Juno orbiter, which is still there studying Jupiter, conducted a close flyby in 2022. It gathered data on the radiation environment and surface features from just 352 kilometers up.
So the focus now shifts entirely to the next decade. We have ESA's JUICE mission Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, launched in 2023. It's primarily focused on Ganymede, another fascinating ocean world, but it includes 2 critical Europa flybys expected around 2031.
But the American mission is really the main event for Europa specifically, NASA's Europa Clipper. It's launching in October 2024. And this mission's whole design, its trajectory, is a direct response to that lethal 5.4 sievert daily radiation dose we talked about.
That's right. The Clipper won't orbit Europa directly. That'd fry the instruments too quickly. Instead, it will orbit Jupiter in a wide, highly elliptical path. This allows it to perform 45 low-altitude flybys of Europa over its lifetime. Dipping in quickly for measurements, then retreating to safer distances, it minimizes the total radiation exposure time.
Clever orbital mechanics. The Clipper's primary goals are investigating habitability, really nailing down the conditions. It'll use powerful ice-penetrating radar to finally determine the true thickness of that ice shell. That's a huge question.
Finally answer the thick versus thin ice debate.
Hopefully. And it's also scouting potential landing sites for a future mission. It needs to map the geology with unprecedented clarity to minimize hazards like those potential pentatowns.
And the future conceptual missions, they really push the boundaries of engineering, don't they? The Europa lander is a proposed concept mission that faces that perfect triple threat: intense radiation, unknown ice thickness, and the potential hazard of those 15-meter-tall ice spikes. Just the shielding alone is a massive, multi-ton challenge.
It's incredibly difficult. And then the ultimate sort of big dream mission concept is the Cryobot Hydrobot that proposes a nuclear-powered melt probe, or cryobot, designed to literally drill, or rather melt its way through kilometers of ice crust using heat from radioactive decay.
Melt through the ice?
Yeah. And once it breaches the liquid layer, it would deploy an autonomous underwater vehicle, the Hydrobot, to swim around and search for life directly in the ocean.
The technical complexity is almost unimaginable. We're talking about overcoming immense pressure deep in that ocean, managing the phase change from solid ice to liquid water right next to a nuclear heat source, and above all, the extreme sterilization protocols required. We absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, contaminate Europa's potentially pristine ocean with terrestrial microbes. Planetary protection is paramount.
Absolutely critical. All these monumental efforts boil down to confirming habitability. We know the potential conditions are there. Liquid water, immense energy provided by tidal flexing. Life could potentially exist clustered around hydrothermal vents on the seafloor, sustained by internal heat and chemical reactions, much like deep-sea vents on Earth.
Or, alternatively, life could rely on chemically produced energy not related to geothermal vents, like serpentinization. That's the process where water interacts with the rocky mantle, producing hydrogen and methane that microbes could potentially consume. Or they could even survive entirely off those ice-derived oxidants, specifically the radiolytically generated oxygen being subducted down from the surface.
And we can't forget the potential habitats outside of the deep vent scenario. Life could be clinging to the underside of the ice sheet, similar to specialized polar algae and bacteria on Earth. Or maybe just floating freely as simple organisms throughout that immense ocean volume.
What's fascinating here, too, is the potential for lithopanspermia, the idea that life, or its precursors, might have arrived from elsewhere. The detection of clay-like minerals, specifically phyllosilicates, on Europa's icy crust suggests a past collision with an asteroid or comet.
Right. And since these minerals are often associated with organic matter and even water alteration on Earth, finding them on Europa raises the possibility that complex organic chemistry, or perhaps even microbial life itself, could have hitched a ride from another celestial body, maybe Mars early in its history, and seeded Europa's ocean.
Life hopping between worlds. And if we look far, far into the cosmological future, like 5 billion years from now, Europa gets this surprising second chance at surface life. When a sun evolves into a red giant, its habitable zone will massively expand outwards. It will eventually engulf Jupiter and its moons.
That enormous increase in stellar heat will temporarily melt Europa's entire ice shell. It could form a temporary global surface ocean that might last for about 0.2 billion years. That's 200 million years.
Wow. A temporary surface ocean. And given that life on Earth took maybe only a couple of 100 million years to appear after the planet formed and cooled, this provides a profound, finite window of opportunity for life to potentially evolve on a warmer, sunlit Europa billions of years from now. It's like a celestial do-over.
It really is. It's clear from all the research from the source material that Europa is a confirmed, active, dynamic ocean world. Immense tidal forces are the driving geological and energy source. They create both tectonic-like features and potential oxygenation systems. It's an incredibly active place.
So the ultimate question for Clipper and any future landers remains focused on the physics and geology. Is the subsurface liquid a vast, interconnected, stable global ocean, one offering broad energy sources and consistent salinity? Or is it primarily composed of isolated, shallower pockets, maybe less stable over time? The search for life really hinges entirely on solving that fundamental distinction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if we synthesize the chemical findings, the presence of carbon, the confirmation of salts from the ocean reaching the surface, and the hypothesis that the surface is covered in that dark reddish material, possibly composed of tholins, those abiotic organic compounds, it raises a truly profound final thought for you, the learner. If life has found a way beneath the ice on Europa, and we confirm that tholins are being actively manufactured on its surface by radiation, does this suggest that prebiotic chemistry, the basic ingredients for life, might actually be the default state of any water-rich world across the galaxy?
Wow, like life's building blocks are just common.
Could the powerful gravitational fields and radiation environment of the Jovian system actually be acting as a massive factory, continually mixing and manufacturing the very precursors of life? That is the incredible possibility that Europa holds out to us.